Okay, here's what's going on. We're going to do a video that's a little bit different this week, a different episode, because we're all in different places. In this situation, what happened was Dr. Phil called and said, hey, we need two of you guys. So Mark and Greg flipped a coin, and Greg won. So he came out to Dallas, and then me and Chase flipped a coin, and I won. So I came out to Dallas. So what we're all going to do is a different video, and we're going to talk about something in body language. We'll talk about something we find important or something that we think is that you want to learn. And so everybody's going to do separate videos, and I'm going to stick them together.
Yeah,
right?
Like you said, all we're going to do is you'll get a round robin, and Scott's delicate little ears.
Ow.
You'll get a round robin, and each of us may talk about something related to body language, not related to body language, related to behavior, or not related to behavior. But we thought this might be an opportunity for you to hear all of us talk individually for about 15 minutes each. Enjoy.
All right, I've been asked for this one before, and so I thought I would just do a stream of consciousness. As you can see, we're all on the road and doing something different. But I'm going to talk today about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how we would use that, not just in my interrogation days, but also in business. I'll start off by using the most extreme cases to explain what Maslow's hierarchy of needs actually mean, and then move from there to how it applies in your daily life and how we work through that. So in 1943, if I'm correct, a guy named Abraham Maslow came up with this concept that there are 5 layers of needs or hierarchical needs in human beings, and that you have to satisfy one of those before you can move to the next. Now, satisfy doesn't necessarily mean really profoundly satisfying. It could mean just checking a box as you move up this path. And the last one is self-actualization, and that one's a hard one to determine exactly what it means. So we'll walk through each of these, and I'll give you the most extreme, what I think it means, and then we'll walk through how to use it. It took me about 20 years to realize how profound this was in the intelligence and interrogation world. And when I say intelligence and interrogation, I mean human intelligence, or HUMINT, and how we collect information. Interrogation is one of those, counterintelligence is another. There's a ton of skills that you use, soft skills, tradecraft that you use to get information from people. And having the ability to understand people is paramount and key in those businesses. So if it's key in those businesses where the relationships are contrived, imagine how key it is in your relationships in business. Maslow said we start off with physiological needs. We then move up the pyramid from physiological needs to safety needs, and then from safety needs to belonging needs, from belonging needs to esteem needs, from esteem then finally to self-actualization. And he built a pyramid. No, that's not some Illuminati gang sign I'm showing. I just put it up this way to think of a pyramid, and said that those at the top are, I'll get to my point of what I think about those in just a second, but as he talked about them, to get to the top, you had to satisfy the first one, second one, third one, fourth one. And if one of those became a need again, it could topple your whole persona, your whole person, to satisfy that one need. So for example, if you are Elvis Presley, unless you're somebody who was famous, who was really well known, who probably had hit self-actualization in some way, well, that's okay until he's in the desert and he needs water, food, air. Those things matter suddenly, and those become his priorities. That's simply what it says. Now let's walk through what each of those mean. Let's use some really hard examples. When I worked prisoners of war, when you're working with detainees, when you're working with refugees from a war, they may have a really hard time satisfying level 1. And level 1 is what we call physiological needs. That's air, that's water, that's food. And think for just a minute about what can satisfy those. And as you're thinking about what satisfies those, it becomes pretty finite. Water, air, food. But these others get to be easier to satisfy in different ways. So if you run into a person who's just been captured, who has just had everything taken from them, they've been strip searched, all those pieces, they're probably going to still need food and water and that kind of thing, and they're probably now going to be grasping for that second one. That second one is going to be safety needs, and that's feeling safe from predators, feeling safe from danger. It's also feeling safe from the weather. It's protection and shelter, clothing, all those things that go with that. And so often with these prisoners, with these detainees, with these refugees that you run into, they're struggling for layer 2, even if they're not struggling for layer 1. You see it play out on the news all the time. These large movements of refugees, you rarely see young men in that, trapped up in that, because they found another way out and gone and done something, or they may be part of the whole crisis that's going on that caused the refugee issue. So you get from that physiological needs to safety needs. once you satisfy the safety needs, and that, again, if you were captured, you're going to have all kinds of uncertainty. You're going to try to figure out, how do I fit into this new world? And you're trying to figure out all that and trying to find what safety is. Safety can be a pretty hard thing for people. Also, if they've been through a trauma in that capture, the safety issue becomes more important and harder to satisfy. Hopefully that makes sense. So as we move up that pyramid, we then are going to move next from physiological and safety to belonging. And belonging is probably one of the most powerful things on earth. Belonging can be satisfied by all kinds of people. And what we do in the interrogation world, when we do a good job, or when we do the elicitation world, is we create a new sense of belonging for that person. So the person's now going to get to know us. They're going to trust us. They're going to rely on us. And there's a time, and you can find me doing it out there on some of these simulations, where you might need to be the harsh, aggressive person. That harsh, aggressive person is simply creating trust for another person. It's all an illusion. As our American soldiers who had been held in captivity by enemy prisoners or enemy prison takers would have said, everything an interrogator does is a trick, a ruse, or a ploy. And they're trying to create that new sense of belonging so that you trust them and you start to do things for them, with them, instead of against them. Even if you're doing it against them, there's a reason, because you're developing a relationship. So we go back to the bottom. We go to physiological needs, safety needs, or belonging needs. Once we get to belonging, then we go to esteem. And esteem simply means I want to be the fastest, the prettiest, the smartest, the whatever-est in the group. It can be anything. It can be healthy or unhealthy. But you are trying to find esteem in that situation. So we've got now physiological, safety, belonging, and esteem. Think about how esteem might play out between me and a prisoner. We're using the most extreme version. We'll talk about civilian life here in just a minute. But if I'm telling this person I think that they're not competent, that they're a poor soldier, that they aren't a good terrorist, that they aren't a whatever, and I insinuate that they're less than competent, but we have developed a relationship, then that relationship will require them to correct me. And it works wonders in the interrogation world, in the intelligence collection world. It's why spies get information by criticizing U.S. government to a U.S. government employee, because they feel like they need to correct the record.
Today's video is sponsored by Aura, and it's a super important time to be talking about them because hackers might have stolen the social security numbers of every single American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from national public data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and other people just doing background checks. So these stolen records that they took include all kinds of personal data, your full name, your social security number, your phone number, along with all these other alternate pieces of data that can follow you along for a long time. And members of this hacker group have reportedly released this information for free online. So this is obviously super serious, and there's no way to go back in time after something like this happens. If you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a giant wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable online than you are right now. But I'm not too worried about it because I use Aura now. Aura alerts me instantly if they find my phone number, my email, my social on the dark web, and they're going to let me know as fast as they can if anybody tries to use this information to access my credit or bank accounts. And they give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. Aura also provides a ton of other features to help keep you safe online, all inside one app. So you can go to our link today, aura.com/TBP, to try 14 days free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed already. I highly recommend you do this right now, because not only is national public data not going to do anything to help you, they probably aren't even going to face repercussions or consequences for this leak. So I don't want to leave myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches. And if you feel the same way, you can go to aura.com/TBP to try 2 weeks for free.
So once you get to esteem, Then you go to self-actualization. And it is so hard to describe and define that most of us can't even begin to understand it. So self-actualization might mean for a guy like the Unabomber that he has not been caught and that he has damaged this many people or injured this many people. Or for Rudolph, who was the abortion bomber, same thing. We don't know where that self-actualization limit is or where it comes from. The good news for you is you don't have to worry about most of these things. Most of the people you're going to talk to in your daily life are not going to have physiological and safety needs. That could be an exception if you're dealing with people in domestic abuse situations, or if you're dealing with people who have food issues, or if you're dealing with those people we talked about, refugees, detainees, all of that. But if you're going to work with Bob and Sam and Joe and Sue at the local factory, in corporate America, in a legal office, you're probably not dealing with the bottom rungs, and you don't have to worry about those top self-actualized people, because remember, all you got to do is topple one of the lower pieces and you'll suddenly have them back in an area where you want to be. So if you can take away their sense of belonging, they'll topple back into belonging. If you can take away their esteem, they'll topple back into protecting esteem. Just like if you snatch them, put them in a cage, and they don't have water, they need water. So just remember, this is a very fluid thing, and how people move up and down it is very complex. And that is thinking about it from the prisoner of war point of view, which is the most extreme, the reason I use this as an illustrator. Now let's talk about how people actually move up and down and through these things. The first thing to remember is human beings are very complex creatures. Anybody who tells you you can use a flat model to show you how a person operates in society is short-sighted at best and doesn't understand people at worst. Because people are like a bell curve. Yes, we always talk about, people who are typical. I call that big chunk in the middle typical. I call the off to the left on the beginning side of it subtypical, and on the right the supertypical. And I use a good example from high school. I've been through high school, secondary school, whatever you want to call it. That group of people that I call supertypicals are the people that you admire and want to be. Everybody admires and wants to be in high school because we're, unstable, trying to figure out what we're doing. Those people are like sports heroes, band folks, maybe, if that's your cup of tea. But they're the people who stand out, student government. Then you got this whole big swath of people down the middle. This is the typical group in the middle of the bell curve who want to be like the cool kids. And that I call supertypical and typical. Off to the left of that is the group that just wants to be cool, just wants to be the middle of the road, just like the typical kid. But they're subtypical for some reason, whatever reason it is. It could just be in their own head. And they want to become typical. So people constantly are moving that curve to move forward. That's another flat model of people. And it's a good model because it helps us to put people in boxes and understand how to talk about them. But what it isn't is an effective model of a human being who operates in society. To make that work, you've got to create a three-dimensional bell curve. For just a minute, think about a person and plotting them on the typical, subtypical, or supertypical spot. And as you look at them, you have to then think about all the thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands of places they might actually be satisfying those needs. So while Bob, who is a marginal software engineer in your company and not necessarily a stellar employee, may not be getting his Maslow satisfied at work, he could easily be getting his Maslow satisfied at church, a social group, a bowling game, some other place. So he could be the coolest, most stellar guy on earth in community theater and a marginal, if not crappy, software engineer in your company. So you're putting people in boxes. Let's think about for a minute what that means. Mark says it, and I've heard it said many times, all models are broken, some are useful. So I've just given you a model that is Maslow, given you a model that is the three-dimensional bell curve. How you choose to put people in those boxes is one piece. Remembering the bell curve is really about understanding that people can be many things to many people, and you have to be careful when you're trying to figure out how to work this Maslow piece for it to be effective. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about people in your office. We're back to the software engineer who may be subtypical at work, but super typical in the bowling alley. how do you then drive this person to be more effective? Well, it doesn't matter if they're subtypical in your office and supertypical somewhere else. You have to be able to work the space they're in. And that means if the person is subtypical at work and I can do things to drag him over into that typical, that center of the bell curve in the job, I'm also raising his esteem in his Maslow in a different way. So I can talk to the person who's at work versus the bowler, and what I'm going to do is use terms and tools to bring him into fitting. Let's assume he doesn't belong. He's an outsider, he's geeky, he doesn't fit the personality types, he's geeky for that group, and doesn't fit the personality types. Well, I would use tools, things to show other people how alike he is to that group, to bring him more belonging in the group. And the way you typically do that is something they call bonding and fracturing. Bonding is a way to make people more alike, fracturing is a way to make them less alike. If I want the person pushed tightly into the group and he's an outsider because he's subtypical, I may then bond him by having Bob do presentations that make other people know his strength in the area that they all operate. That bonding tool, that ability to show how alike he is to that team, will cause him to become more like the team, because him to become more typical. Now that more typical pushes him in the belonging areas, if that makes sense. Belonging, remember, is step 3 in Maslow's hierarchy. If I want him to have more esteem, I'm then going to point out what he does better than others. And I would call that fracturing. Fracturing is a tool I use to drive this guy to look more stellar than the others. I might pick a presentation, for example, that Bob knows more about than everybody else in the room, and they may not even understand the concepts. When Bob does that, he grows in esteem in my organization. Forget the bowling organization. He grows in esteem. Now, if I want to go the other way, let's say Bob has gotten too big for his britches in the group, and I want to use bonding in a negative way, I can force him back down by taking esteem, by giving him some kind of a presentation to do, for example, that forces him to look less competent than others. That's the negative side of fracturing. I'm forcing him down, or that's the negative side of bonding. Sorry, I'm forcing him back into the group. I can also then use fracturing in a positive way, meaning I can say Bob's in a group and he's too big for that group and doesn't understand it. Then what I could do is also have him go and present to another group that's outside of his area, so he starts to grow in esteem or belonging in that new group. This is a quick rundown, remembering that humans are very complex. I just want to give you an eye-opener to how I think about Maslow, and happy to do more on this if this kind of thing is important for you or if it adds value for you. If it is, just put something down in the comments and say, Greg, more of Maslow, and we'll find a way to do it.
I'm going to talk about psychopaths and psychopathy, my favorite thing to talk about. If you're really interested in psychopathy and psychopaths, you can check out Behavior X. That's my other channel. I'll put a link below because I got a bunch of videos about psychopaths there. All right. So we're going to talk about several things today. When it comes to psychopathy, we're going to talk about the limbic system. We'll talk about the differences in a psychopath and a sociopath. We're going to talk about the similarities of psychopaths and narcissists. Then we're going to talk about some of the red flags you'll be looking for if you think you've run into a psychopath or if you're dealing with one. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the psychopathic stare. What is that? What is it really? A lot of people think they know. A lot of people are wrong. So we're going to get into that specifically. I'll break that down and explain it to you so there'll be no question about what that is. Then we're going to talk about the psychopath's first move. When you meet one, what's the first thing they're going to do? Fascinating, really. Then we're going to talk about the myths of psychopathy and psychopaths. The things people think are true that aren't, or things you hear all the time but you're not sure because you don't deal with them. We're going to talk about that, and we'll cut right through and get right to it. And I'll tell you the things that aren't true about them. So first things first, the limbic system. Now, when I talk about the limbic system and psychopaths, I focus on the amygdala, okay? But keep in mind, what I'm talking about is a very small part of psychopathy. When you deal with psychopathy, it's much more than just the amygdala and the limbic system. There's a lot more going on in there. You've got the frontal lobe, you got the parietal lobes, you got a whole lot going on in there, all right, when it comes to psychopathy. But I'm just going to focus on these one little things because it's the easiest way to explain it. Because most people out here don't want to get into the minutia of stuff. Some people do, and that's fine. I can do that. I'm not going to do it on this. I'm going to keep it simple because I got 15 minutes to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. Okay? So the amygdala are a part of the limbic system. Okay? And they're two little things about as big as almonds, about the size of an almond. And those are the parts of the limbic system that deal with and house, let's say, the emotional parts of empathy and sympathy, those kind of things. Sympathy is when you feel sorry for somebody. You know, you see somebody hit their thumb and go, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. I wish that hadn't happened to that person. But empathy is the part where you see them hit their thumb with a hammer, and you go, oh, man, I bet that hurt. Psychopaths can't do that. They are not empathetic at all, not even a little bit. They can't feel empathy for you or anybody else, a baby, a dog, nothing, okay? Because they don't have the equipment that allows them to do that. By that I mean the amygdala aren't working properly. They're missing or they're damaged. That's, in a nutshell, the limbic system and the psychopath, okay? Now the next one, the difference is in a sociopath and a psychopath. Now, there are no sociopaths. That's just a word that has been used to soften the term psychopath. However, since it's in the zeitgeist and everybody uses it, what's been come to be known as is, come to be known as, I guess you'd say, I don't know, however you say it grammatically correct. They're just hardcore criminals, okay? They don't have the empathy or sympathy for somebody because of the way they were raised. It's nature versus nurture. Sociopath is nature or nurture, and the psychopath is nature. You're born a psychopath, okay? You either are or you are not. You can't turn into one. You can't cure it, okay? So psychopaths are born. Sociopaths are nurtured. They're created, in other words. Now let's talk about the similarities in psychopaths and narcissists, okay? Now, all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. And by that, I mean the narcissist is quite often they're raised that way. There's been an argument lately, actually for a little while, about whether it's something genetic, like with psychopathy as well. But it seems like they're raised that way to me. I'm going to lean more on the side of the nurture part of that instead of the nature part. So I think they've probably been raised that way to be narcissist. But that's the similarity. Some psychopaths are normal people, because they don't know they're psychopaths and they weren't raised in a violent environment, or their parents were really loving and nurturing, their family was really loving family, and they don't know violence. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what it looks like being mean to somebody. They don't know what it looks like being mean to little animals. Okay, so they come out just fine. And some of them, you never know they're psychopaths. They never know they're psychopaths. Not all of them are violent. Not all of them are mean. They're not all crazy with, wow, look in their eye and killing people and setting things on fire and doing all kinds of wild stuff. Some of them just aren't. They're not like that. And they're very productive. And they're great people. But they're psychopaths. Their brain isn't functioning properly. Those parts of the brain we talked about. So once you get into this, be careful of that. Don't be thinking everybody's a psychopath. It's real easy to do. Because they show one or two traits that you think might be psychopathy, doesn't mean they're a psychopath. So don't jump on that and go, yeah, that's the way it is. They're a psychopath. And the way they find out they're a psychopath is really interesting. And if you watch this channel all the time, you'll know I've talked about this before. Because here's how they usually find out they're psychopaths. Because people always wonder, how do they know they're psychopaths? Do they know they're psychopaths? How do they find out? What happens when all that's going on? What happens is this. Quite often, they don't know they're psychopaths, okay? But psychopaths don't like calm little towns. That's why I know a whole lot of psychopaths in little towns. They're always in not always, but most of the time they're in big cities where there's a lot of action going on, a lot of things happening, okay? So let's say you're a psychopath. And sorry, my lips are dry. I don't know why. Let's say you're a psychopath, okay? You move to Nashville. And what you probably do is live down there on 2nd Avenue maybe, because there's a lot going on, the hustle and bustle of the city. And a lot of action. It's loud, music, people coming by, things happening all the time. So you might get lost down there on 2nd Avenue, okay? And let's say it's the weekend. And you've decided you're going to have Chinese food for supper on Saturday night, okay? So you go down 2nd Avenue, and you're going to go to the Chinese place, okay? As you're walking down 2nd Avenue, you see something going on, You see police cars and an ambulance, everybody standing around. You think you hear somebody like crying or something. The closer you get, the louder the crying gets. You walk up on this scene, and it's let's say a little child has been run over, right? And there's the mother over the little child crying. She's distraught because that's her child has passed away. They're a horrible, horrible scene, right? And you see this, and all you think is, I know some importance happened here. This is a big deal. But I think it's going to be sweet and sour chicken. That's what I'll have, sweet and sour chicken. So you go on and get your Chinese food, and you walk past the same scene on the way home. Okay. You finish eating your Chinese food that night. Then the next thing you know, you're in the bathroom, looking in the mirror, trying to imitate those faces you saw in the mother, because you know what that is. You know it's crying and you know all that, but you've been thinking about it. Why don't I understand what that is? Everybody does it. I've seen it a lot. What is that? So you start trying to imitate those emotions in the mirror. See if you can do it. And you don't understand why. You don't know what that is. You just know everybody does it. And that's when you start going, something's all right here. I'm different than everybody else. They usually don't say anything about it. They may, but you probably wouldn't say anything about it. Say, I don't know why I don't know what these feelings are. That would actually be concern for that. You may not even have concern about it, you know? So that's how they find out, or they find out something's wrong, or they realize, in other words, something's not right about them. A situation like that, as an example. But it doesn't mean they go, oh, I'm a psychopath. I know I am. They may read about it and find out about it later and go, oh no, they wouldn't be concerned because they can't feel concerned about that because they're a psychopath. Really wouldn't bother them. They may read it and go, I think I'm a psychopath, and that'd be it. So that's how they find out. They just, it dawns on them. They realize it in a situation like that. So some of the red flags of psychopathy, or a psychopath, what are you looking for? Well, let's say you know someone, and it's easy to say, oh, they're mean little children, but you look at their history, okay? When they were younger, as they were raised, let's say they're in their 20s or 30s, okay? Or older or whatever. When they're younger, did they have a drug problem? Were they in trouble all the time with the law? Not just like in trouble at school and things like that. A lot of us got in trouble at school, things like that. But I mean, in trouble with the law, breaking into stores, stealing cars, but doing it all the time and getting away with it, or getting away with it a lot. It doesn't really bother them. Doing violent things to little animals, fighting all the time, but really trying to hurt somebody, not just fighting them, really trying to hurt them bad, See what that history is, because it doesn't mean they're a psychopath. There are people like that. They might be a sociopath because they've been raised in a situation of violence. So when you start looking for psychopathy, or you have a question about that, find out about that. And not just one of these things. It's got to be a bunch of these things together. And then you can start making decisions about whether you think they are or not. Sometimes it takes 6 months to a year to diagnose a psychopath properly, to make sure that person is one. So there's no way you can spot one. I see these 3 things about this person. I know they're a psychopath. You can't do it. I've seen them behave this way, so I know they're a psychopath. Can't do it. What is the psychopathic stare, or the psychopath stare? All right, here we go. This is it. This is what it is. This is how it works, and this is why it happens, okay? There's a lot involved here. The psychopathic stare is not just somebody looking at you real mean with a real weird look and they look evil and all that. That's not what it is. That's not what it is. That's not what it is. What it is this. For example, and I always use this as an example. You're in a restaurant or a bar, and you look over and you see somebody looking at you, and they keep looking at you. They don't have an evil look or anything like. If they do, man, that person's crazy or something. I don't know. But if they're just looking at you, if they don't look away, do you know why they don't look away? They don't know that that's supposed to feel weird because it doesn't make them feel weird. Okay, it doesn't feel odd to them. They can't feel that. That's a psychopathic stare, or the psychopath stare. Now, what's the psychopath's first move when you meet one? Okay, this is a good one. When you meet a psychopath, what they're going to do is this. They're going to be listening to you. They're going to listen to the way you talk, what you talk about, how you talk about those things. They're going to be interested in you, but how you look and how you sound. It's a form of matching and mirroring they're going to start doing. Because what you're going to see in the psychopath is you. They're reflecting you to you. See what I mean? Everybody likes, most everybody likes themselves. So you're fascinated with somebody like you. That's who they want to be. Because they don't have their own personality. There's nothing in there. It's just a body running around. Okay? So they see you and they start imitating you. But quite often when you meet one, you feel like you've met a kindred spirit. Somebody says you cannot believe you've not met him before. You're just like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest person in the world. I can't believe how well we get along, how much I like them. Because I know they like me too. We have so much in common. It's going, the first 15 minutes just went so well. They're great. You feel like you can't believe you've never met this person before. And everything's led up to meeting this person. You're like, wow, this is awesome. Okay? Then, let's say you become friends with them, and then you end up, if it's a guy and you're a girl, or let's say you end up marrying him. All right? You tell all your friends how wonderful this person is, or you may just be dating them. Just tell everybody how wonderful they are, what a fantastic person they are. And all you talk about is how wonderful this person is, because you're really talking about you, their version of you. They're doing the things you like because they're doing you, man. They're imitating you in a way. Okay? You're telling everybody how great this person is. And then what happens is we call it the mask slips. Okay? When the mask slips, that's when they get mean, start beating you up, and that's when things get ugly quick. Okay? That's when the mask slips. And the first thing they're going to do is make you like them. That's their first move. It's to make the psychopath makes you like them. Okay? I've just got a few minutes left. All right. Let's move on to the myths of psychopathy and psychopaths. All right. The main one that really bugs me is everybody thinks psychopaths are really, really smart. They think they're brilliant. Every one of them. Sometimes they're just a doofus. They're idiots. Some are just dumb. Think about it. They're born a psychopath because their brain doesn't function properly. So just because some of them are really smart and get away with some really tricky things, these serial killers get away with it for a while. Some of them are pretty smart, but they're not brilliant, a lot of them. Everybody's under the impression they are from movies and TV shows. A lot of them aren't, just idiots. So keep that in mind, all right? Remember, it's just a person. They're born where their brain doesn't function properly. So some books you might find interesting. There's one we always talk about on the behavior panel called Without Conscience by Robert D. Hare, Dr. Robert D. Hare. He's the, Michael Jackson of psychopathy. He's the Tesla of psychopathy. He's the guy that figured out the psychopathy test. You always hear about the psychopath test. So he's the guy that, in other words, that came up with that. All right, he's the one that developed that. That's widely used when you're trying to decide if someone's a psychopath or not. Okay, that's the guy. Joe Navarro has a great book called Dangerous Personalities. Check that book out. You'll love it. Good book, great book actually. So check that one out. And there's another one that Robert Hare did with I can't remember the other guy's name. Never can remember it. But it's called Snakes in Suits. That deals with psychopaths in business. All right. You'll really like that one. So I think my time's up.
One of the most important things I think that you really need to know if you're studying any kind of behavior is something called the 5C model. I own a company called Applied Behavior Research, and we publish the international standards of behavior profiling just so people can use a common language and methodology when they're doing any kind of reading of behavior. So if you want to look at that, I'll put it in the link in the description. So let's start with the 5 C's. The 5 C's are, in order, the way that you need to be observing human behavior. And the first one, and most important, is change. Can you spot change? Being a detector of change is so important. I know how a person normally behaves, or I know how they behave during a certain type of relaxation or comfort, and I'm looking for changes to that behavior. That's more important than anything else. And the next thing is context. What's going on in this situation that might be causing that behavior? If I see somebody suddenly cross their arms, but the AC just came on and they're freezing cold, or I'm asking somebody questions about something, then they look stressed out, but they recently had some trauma around that issue and it's a traumatic memory for them. Context is very important. So the next C, this is number 3 here, is clusters. So clusters of behavior are really important to pay attention to, because you're going to hear a lot of people say one thing always means deception, or one thing means that somebody is absolutely lying to you. I'd be very, very cautious anytime you hear somebody say anything like that. So let's go to the next C. Culture is very important. Culture means that, is there something in this person's culture, maybe the family that they live in, the town that they live in, the state, the country that they live in? Are there cultural influences in their sociological background that might be influencing how I'm seeing them behave? And finally, in my opinion, what I think is the least important thing on this list is the checklist. This would be the behavioral table of elements, or this would be the known list of behaviors that people say, these are the deceptive behaviors, or these behaviors indicate a likelihood of deception. So again, it's change, context, clusters, culture, and checklist, finally. So with all of that put together, if you didn't know this, I studied medical neuroscience for a very long time, and there's a formula to diagnose neurological issues that I use with human behavior. And I've adapted that neurological diagnostic formula into human behavior, and I think it makes for a much, much better diagnostic process. And this formula is observed behavior. I have observed behavior, and this equals what I want to look for during the observed behavior is it acute, is it subacute, or chronic? Those are the medical terms that we use for diagnostics, but is it happens suddenly and it's standing out and they haven't done it before? If it's subacute, they do it occasionally, and maybe it's a known tell, or maybe you've heard that word before. It's a behavior we see during stress and we know that they do that. Or it's chronic, which means this person does this all the time. This behavior is in their baseline, which means I might need to ignore that behavior completely. So here is the formula. So pull out a piece of paper if you don't have one ready to go. Change plus cluster equals alert. So now I've got this alert here. I'm going to take this alert and pair it up with context. So alert plus context equals probability. So now I have the probability, and I'd like, this is a likely deceptive statement or a likely high stress statement, but then I take probability minus culture to get the findings. Probability minus culture equals the findings. So if there are cultural factors that might be influencing that, I'm taking away those cultural factors from the probability number. And you'll see the number scoring system inside of that document. So let's talk about the 4 laws of behavior. If you're ever studying human behavior, I find it absolutely critical to view human beings through the lens of those 4 laws of behavior. And the number 1 law is everybody is suffering and insecure. Everyone that you meet is going through something hard in their life. Everybody that you meet is going to have some kind of insecurity with their behavior, they're going to be concealing some kind of shame. They're going to be ashamed of stuff, or they're going to have insecurities in social situations. So everyone you meet is going through suffering and feels insecure at certain times or about certain topics. So number 2, we are all wearing a mask. Every human being that you meet for the rest of your life is going to be wearing some kind of mask. Even the Greek origin of the word person comes from persona. I know I'm going a little Mark Bowden on you here, but persona means mask. The literal word person means mask. So I want you to remember that none of us are perfect. And when you see someone trying to look perfect, that's just an example of a mask. And when it comes to human masks and the masks that we wear sociologically, a mask is typically made up of or made to look like the exact opposite of what the mask is trying to conceal. You see a mask of somebody that's like all jacked up all the time, their volume's really high, their posture's really overdone all the time. That's a big deal, and it's covering up the opposite of that behavior. It's covering up somebody who is afraid of being hurt. So law number 3 is that everybody pretends not to wear a mask. Everybody you meet pretends or acts as though we're not wearing a mask. So it's not really part of our conversation. It's not a topic that we typically discuss, especially in this culture. is that I'm wearing a mask, or here's what my mask looks like. It's not something that we discuss hardly ever. So the final law, and this is what I think is absolutely the most important law, that I could just permanently get you to accept an idea and stay with it for the rest of your life and just see human beings through this one idea, is everyone that you will ever meet in your life is a result of childhood suffering and reward. What do they do to avoid suffering in childhood? And that gets brought into adulthood, whether we like it or not. These are unconsciously brought into our adulthood. And the reward, what do we do as children to get rewards? On a great scale, a perfect scale, what did somebody do to get achievement or recognition or social status? And on a much darker scale, there's people out there that as children, their reward was food or water. So the reward part of that is different for everybody. So is the suffering part of that for everybody. And finally, I want to show you the 4 lenses of behavior. And these are the 4 ways that you can see people differently. And these are broken, different facts and reasons. So if I see people as broken, my first instinct is to fix it. And one of the examples I always give when I'm talking about this is someone cuts you off on the freeway and then like reaches out the window and flips you the bird. That's going to piss you off. It's going to piss you off big time, especially if you're in level 1 of understanding other human beings. So level 1 is broken. So what do we naturally want to do for broken things in our life? When we see something is being broken, we have a tendency to want to fix those things. So if I see this guy cuts me off on the freeway, my instinct as a level 1 person is to rectify this issue. I need to go pull in front of him. I need to go cut him off. I need to pull up and flip him off. I need to even out this scenario somehow. So that's broken. We take the same scenario with a level 2 person, and this is different. We see people as different. So this is getting cut off, and I'm seeing that person not as broken, but they're different from me. Still going to have some emotional reactions, still going to hate them, might secretly call them a D-bag or something like that behind the wheel as we're looking up at their vehicle. And that's a level 2 person. The level 3 person is a great place to be because level 4 is hard to get to, especially full-time in your life. So level 3 is facts. I view this person as a set of facts. This is why you never get mad at a hurricane or a tornado or a thunderstorm. You're not mad at the thing. You're mad that it might have happened. But if you view a person as a fact, why is that guy acting like an a-hole? Because that's what he's supposed to do. He's doing that because that's what those people are supposed to do. It's just a fact. That's how they act. So the first 2 levels, you'll notice one thing happened. And we saw anger in those first 2, and there's no anger in the 3rd level. So when you get to the 3rd level, anger kind of goes away. And the first 2, anger is there because anger is always a secret, concealed desire that something was different. A secret desire that you could change things a little bit. And then we get all the way to level 4. And this is reasons. I'm seeing people as reasons. And this goes back to the 4th law of behavior. And the 4th law of behavior is everybody is a product of childhood suffering and reward. So I'm not seeing a man cutting me off on the freeway if I'm a level 4 person. I'm seeing a scared boy cut me off and someone who's scared to get hurt. And they know if I bark enough, if I make enough noise, and if I look tough enough, people aren't going to hurt me. So take that into your life, and also take a look at the people around you. What level are they in? Are they seeing broken people, different facts, up even higher, or reasons? And the reasons is the biggest thing that I could ever give you to make you a happier person and to make you a better behavior profiler at the same time. Because what happens if you're not seeing people as reasons, then you are absolutely judging people. And judging people makes you a bad leader, maybe a bad person, depending on who you talk to. Definitely if you talk to me. But you're also, I judge other people, that 100%, that means that I'm prone to judging myself all the time. But it also makes me bad at persuasion, leadership, influence, all that other stuff. It makes you a bad behavior profiler. So try to get as close as you can to understanding that 4th law of behavior, that we're a product of childhood suffering and reward, and that 4th lens, the 4th level of seeing people as reasons.
What have I got today? I'm taking you on a little bit of a walk today as a panelist. We are going to flaneur. This was the 19th century, early 19th century idea of kind of lounging around on a walk, loafing about in order to get a sense of the environment around us, using the urban environment as a reflection of what's happening in our own minds and what's happening with others around us, our relationship with others. And of course, that's really what, I guess, analysing body language and behaviour is really about. How can we better understand other people, and how can we better understand ourselves? By the way, we are moments from my home, just up there and round the corner. Moments from Mrs. Atwood, who I saw yesterday in the garden, looking after her flowers. She has a fantastic garden, by the way. Here we are, beautiful sunny day well, the sun keeps coming in and out. So somebody's roaring engine next to me there. Let me talk a bit louder to go over the top of that roaring engine happening there. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about behaviour, isn't it? You're always in relationship with something else. Here I am responding to the environment around me, raising my voice because of the mechanics around me. And we've always got to take that into consideration when we're analysing non-verbal communication, body language, that we understand that the person involved is in relationship with a whole bunch of other factors. Their environment, be that the natural world, anything other than human, the humans, the populace, the individuals, the humans, machines. So we've got to look for the relationships with other entities and the spaces between those relationships, rather like Mondrian, the 20th century artist, looked at, well, if we look up here, looked at the gaps between branches of a trees, not the branches themselves, but the space in between those, and from that extrapolated the squares that you now see as Mondrian's artwork. He started off with looking at the relationship between the branches as a spatial one, as a, I guess, a negative space. What can we do in terms of looking at the negative space between each other? And so that's partly what I'm doing today, is looking at what it is around us that has a relationship with our behaviour. Here I am walking down this beautiful street in Toronto. This street used to be a river. You know, back in the day, not quite this street, but it goes in that direction there. The river started up at where the glacier ended back there. As you go north of where I am right now, just a little way north, you come to where, let's say 20,000 years ago, roughly speaking, a glacier started to melt, decrease its speed, and melt, and therefore it left the land that we're on now, going down to Lake Ontario, which is down that way there, huge lake. By the way, I'm in Canada right now, Ontario, Canada. Canada, large land mass as part of North America, just above the US. Ontario is a province in Canada. It's about the size of Spain and France put together. Glacier ended up there, created a river, the Tattle Creek, which runs kind of roughly in this direction along here. We're going to walk down here to Tattle Creek Park. I want to show you a jug, because the jug that this, it's a fountain, but it's made in the shape of a jug. Here, let me just go across the road here. Turn this round, then you'll be able to see it. Fountain made in the shape of a jug. If you added up all this ironwork, put it out at length, and added up the length of it, it would be the exact length of what the Tattle Creek used to be, from the top of the glacier, melting 20,000 years ago, down to Lake Ontario. The Victorians buried that river underground, and so as we step over this land, we're stepping over an old river. Now, what has anything of that got to do with non-verbal communication, body language, behavior? Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to make everything we can in our shape in some way. The whole world is a Rorschach test of what's going on in our mind. You see the figure there? I mean, actually, some of it looks almost kind of bird-like there, but for sure there's the body there, there's kind of a backbone to it, there's a mouth part to it. You know, it's so very easy to see ourselves in everything. That's the way the brain works. It looks for itself in everything. Let me just pop down here for you, because let's go and look at some vehicles. They're a classic example. Vehicles originally, you know, often named after horses because they replaced horses in many ways. So, you know, you got the Chevy, the Cheveur, the Chevrolet, the horse, the 2CV, the Cheveux, the horse, and there's a Tesla there, but you see the eyes and the mouth there easily, don't you? Let's pop down and see another one down here. A bit windy. Hope that wind is not bothering our microphone too much. Oh, we've got it. Oh, let's have a look at this motorbike here. Lovely, a Triumph, one-eyed Triumph. You know, you really need the two eyes, don't you, to see a face. You see a nice little, I don't know, is it smiling there? Moving along, we make things in our images, and so every time we're analysing, whoa, it's windy. Every time we're analysing non-verbal communication, body language, behaviour, we've got to understand that we're always going to see something of ourselves in that. This whole world that I'm passing through right now, flaneuring, loitering through, kind of strolling through, this whole world is being made up in my head. Of course it exists, of course it's a real world, but it's being made up in my head. Here we are, we're just about to go past a subway station, TTC, and so you always get a lot more people gathering around transport, food and transport. So we didn't see many people back there, but as we move past transport, we'll see more people. There's a Starbucks over there. As we move past areas where you can get food and water, there'll always be more people gathering. And so here we are, starting to see more of the world's Torontonians. Of course, because we're moving past transport and public transport, potentially less people who are from this specific area. So that's a good thing to take in mind as you start to see people who are close to more public methods of transport, especially international public methods of transport. You can start to predict that you're getting less people from the locale, and you probably want to assess behaviour based on that. So look, within minutes of going from my home, we are right downtown in Toronto. There we've gone from the peace and quiet of my I guess home urban environment to the busy areas of Toronto. I'm trying to cross the road right now. This is Bloor Street, by the way. And so you can see my behaviour has changed in relationship with that. The person that you were getting back there is not the person you've got here, because I'm having to monitor the traffic lights here, my ability to cross the road. There's a psychopath here, which are notorious for getting yourself run over on if you're not paying attention to the vehicles that are moving quite fast. I mean, the bikes that can be moving quite fast, but very silently. And so you'll see my behaviour has, here we go, my behaviour has changed because the environment has changed around me. Environment changes, body language changes, behaviour moves people off their last baseline into a new baseline. Way more people around now. Why? Well, there's a museum down the road here. There's the big brand shopping area, your Gucci's and your Versace's and all of that stuff. Concert hall over here. For those of you that have seen my TEDx talk that was done at this building here a number of years ago. We're passing by the music school. More traffic. I'm seeing people with suitcases. Why, there's hotels around here. So, as the environment changes, things change. As I move through that environment, my behaviour changes. As time moves on, that's something that often isn't accounted for in looking at behaviour. Is what time is it? Right now it's midday here in Toronto. So if I'd have come out at, say, 6 o'clock in the morning, there would have been a whole different set of behaviours. Here we go. We're going down what's called Philosopher's Walk, which is, I guess, perfect for our flaneuring, because we are doing a bit of a walk and a bit of a philosophy, thinking about how we think. You know, there are many organisms on the planet, and some people will say some of them are quite aware of themselves. Others will say they're not really that aware of themselves. You know, it depends how you look at that. But to my point of view, I think we are the only organism on the planet that can think about how it thinks. There may be some, maybe, that are somehow self-aware in a way that we might be able to equate with ourselves, but we've always got to remember we see ourselves in everything. So, but all the same, let's just be open, and there may be some of that. At the same time, I can't think that there's anything else on the planet like us that can do this, which is I'm with you here today, flaneuring and thinking about how we think, thinking about how we think about behaviour and how time might add into that. My dog, Peach, I can't understand time at all, really. There's an internal clock going on, and she knows when it's roughly when she would usually eat. So there's an internal clock going on. That's very biological. You know, her stomach is emptying in a certain way. It has a certain endocrinology to it. But to my understanding, she can't really think about the future, and she can't think about how she thinks about the future. And I can think about how I think about the future. So here we are on Philosopher's Walk. That Tattle Creek River that I was talking about, that used to go down here back in the day, back in Victorian times. As I said, the Victorians buried it. Up to this side, there's some building works going on, but that's Toronto University over there, Toronto University over here. As we walk through Philosopher's Walk, flaneuring, walking along, ambling along, and thinking about how we think. Now we're dipping right down now into, back in the day, we would have actually been wading through a river here until the Victorians did. Well, it was, the problem with it is this area of Toronto, pretty much known as the Annex, or the Annex is just above, the part that was annexed from the original Fort York, which was a British fort built there in order to stop the Americans coming up. Obviously, as you well know, the British then left from Fort York, went all the way over to Washington and burnt down the White House, which is why it's the White House, because it had to be whitewashed white because the British had burnt it down. Anyway, they left from Fort York. This is the annex of Fort York, the part. Anyway, it was just so muddy and mosquito-ridden here, called Muddy York, by the way, that the Victorians decided to drain it completely and produce this much nicer, drier walk. There are some places near me where you can actually put your ear closer to the ground. You can hear the river underneath, which is quite amazing. We're going to go over to Victoria Park now as we start to end our journey. Remember, relationships between people, time, the spaces in between people, the objects around, the environment, that has a huge influence on behavior whenever you're analyzing it. Think about, where is this person? Who are they with? Who have they been with? What is the time for them? what was happening before in time for them. What's their future? And you said, hey, we're just about to go into Victoria Park. Wow, if I walk a bit faster, I will make it across the road. Look what that idea, look what that idea of time has done to my movement there, knowing I want something in the future, but I've only got a set amount of time to get there. I made it across the road and we didn't have to wait. As we move into Victoria Park, I'll go and show you Ontario Parliament. As I said, Ontario, it's about the size of France and Spain put together, so obviously it has its own government. It's big enough, as every province does in Canada, to have its own government. We're going to go and see a statue down here. How about we do that? Because what else would be made in a human image but the image of a human being? But, you know, always nuance to the way we make statues. So Ontario Parliament, just down this way. We'll maybe take a quick look at that. See, I'm a short walk from Ontario Parliament, which is sometimes where I go work. And we're going to go to the statue of Edward. Yes, it would be Edward VII. That is the great-great-grandfather of the current King of England, King Charles III. So, public space. People gathered. You will always see some interesting behaviours in public spaces. And so there we go. That is a statue of Edward VII, great-great-grandfather of the current monarch. So what do we see there? The hat is off there. So in a way, what is it? Is it a salute? Is it vulnerability? Is it a salute to the people? Is it, though he's on his high horse, literally on his high horse there, literally has the high ground, the status. Is he coming down to our level somewhat? Good looking horse. I think Greg might have something to say about that horse there, if he knew what I was talking about. So interesting. One-handed riding there. I'm sure that he was a skillful enough rider to ride one-handed. But there we are, controlling the horse with one hand, hat is off in the other hand, sabre on this side, no sword out, so he's pretty relaxed. There's no battle to be had at this point. You know, often you might see some monarchs or certainly generals or navy commanders in British, statute law with their sabre out, pretty calm, collected. Well, why not? He's in Canada right now. It can be at times pretty calm and collected. Let's finish off this little walk together. I hope you've enjoyed this. By the way, I love to do this. Walk around in an urban way and allow that movement to help me think, help me join up the dots between ideas in my mind. What do they say? Your best ideas come in the bed, the bath, the bus. The bed, the bath, the bus is what we always used to say about creativity. You know, that dream sleep when you're relaxing in the bath, maybe the shower for some people. And on the bus, i.e. you're not doing anything, your brain can kind of zone out in some kind of way. Look, I won't take you any further. How long have we been chatting together now? I can't quite tell on this. I've lost track of time. Isn't that ironic? I've lost track of time. There's the back, essentially, of Ontario Parliament there. Look, rambling, I know, but I am literally on a ramble with you. So rambling, and so of course my thoughts are gonna have that air to them. But rambling about behavior and how environment has a huge effect on behavior, and so always be thinking, where is this person? Where have they been? When were they there? What is the timeline on this? What is the relationship? I've been through a whole bunch of different environments with you today where my behavior has changed because my conscious and unconscious mind is seeing different relationships, different risks going on. So you'll see my behavior changes as I'm going through different risk environments. And always, as Chase says, look for what's not there. And think about those great artists who would look at the space between things instead of the things, the space between things, and use those as a jumping off point to be thinking about how we humans connect. Look, if you're interested in human behavior, body language, nonverbal communication, any of those things, whatever you want to call it, all we're doing it for is in order to get on better with people. It's just better to get on better with people on the whole. Understand people better, understand ourselves better in order to get on better with each other. So think about that, I would say. Think about that. How can you use all these skills that we're giving you in this episode to get on better with people around you and understand yourself better in order to achieve that?
All right, fellas. I think this is another good one, and we'll see you next time.